Hey everyone, welcome to the third phonology video. As a recap, last time we determined that in our fake language, the sounds E and I were allophones of the same phoneme and had the following contexts. Focusing on E first, let's look at the stuff before the sound. What do G, L, D, and Th all have in common? Well, they're consonants and they're voiced. Other than that, they have no shared place or manner, at least between all of them, and so let's just note them as C plus voice. Looking at the stuff after E, we have N, M, K, and G. These are all consonants, but they're not all voiced like last time. They also don't seem to share a place, but they are all stops, even though some are oral and some are nasal. Let's note these as C plus stop. For E, we can then create a single general context of C plus voice before and C plus stop after. Remember again that the underscore here represents where the E occurs. I, on the other hand, is much less predictable. We seem to use it after fricatives, nasal stops, voiceless stops, and even at the beginning of a word. In terms of what comes after it, we see a similar situation. We can't nail down exactly when it's used, and there's not an easily generalizable form that we can create for it. Because we were told that the data we were given were complete for the language, in a case like this, we would say that this sound is used in all other instances, or an elsewhere case. When we say that I is elsewhere, we are saying that I occurs in all of the cases that E does not. At least for that particular phoneme. Obviously there's other sounds in the language. So linguists are pretty big on formal rules. We like to pretend that we're doing math, and I think we have a chip on our shoulder about being a quote-unquote real science. So we're going to go through the formalism that we use to write rules that tell us how sounds occur when they are allophones of a phoneme. So, in general, we have this following sort of schema, or example, or general pattern. We have phoneme, which is in between slashes, an arrow saying that the phoneme becomes. Then we say what sound, what particular phone the phoneme becomes, and we note that within square brackets. Then we use a slash, a single slash, just to say where, or this is the context in which. And then we give our context. Here I've written context underscore context, where the context before the underscore is the preceding context and the context after the underscore is the following context. In total, we can read this as a phoneme becomes a phone when between a preceding context and a following context. So what would this look like for the situation above? Well, first let's define our phoneme as I between slashes. We could call it E between slashes, or anything. We could use a happy face emoji if we really wanted to. But we use generally the most common form of it, or the elsewhere case. So that's why I am using the lax vowel. It's used in the elsewhere contexts. So, I becomes E, again in square brackets here, when, denoted by a slash, there is a voiced consonant before and a voiced stop after. Remember again that we use C plus voice to say any voiced consonant, and C plus stop to say any stop consonant. Now, you may be wondering if these represent any voiced consonant and any stop consonant, but our data didn't actually show us every single voiced consonant or stop consonant in the IPA. Why is it that we can be this broad? Well, generally, when writing rules like this, there is an assumption that when you write consonant plus voice, you're saying any of the consonants in the language. Accordingly, when we say consonant plus stop, we are referring to every stop consonant in this fake language's phonemic inventory. Now, this just tells us what happens in order for I to become E. But that's only one half of the equation. We said that there are two allophones to this phoneme. There's E and there's I. So let's explain where to use the other allophone. So in this case, I'm going to just put the instance in which I becomes I underneath the previous example. In a case like this, because it's the same phoneme that's becoming two different things, you don't need to put that the phoneme becomes this phone and then underneath, again, the phoneme becomes this other phone. When you write them like this, it's sort of assumed that you're referring to the phoneme becoming both of these things. So that's why I only have the phoneme, the slash I slash on the top one. But you could put it on the bottom one as well. Now, how do we describe where I happens? We said that we can't generalize much, and that it essentially happens elsewhere. Luckily, this is one case where linguists haven't made things more difficult than they need to be. If we want to say that the phoneme becomes I elsewhere, then all we do is write arrow I in square brackets, because we're talking about the actual phonetic realization, where, denoted by a slash, and just the word elsewhere. So in total, this rule, with both instances of the allophones, would read as I becomes E when between a voiced consonant and a stop consonant, and I becomes I elsewhere. Without including all of the rules explaining every allophone for a given phoneme, our phonological rule is not complete. If you were on a test and you forgot to put the elsewhere case, you would not receive full marks for that question. So it's very important to always remember to tell where the elsewhere case is happening. Your phonological rule is not complete if you are not giving an elsewhere case. Now, let's try another example. I'm going to be going through this one in basically the same way. The reason I'm going through these again is mostly because I get paid by the minute of lecture, so the more time I take up, the more money I get. I'm joking. I don't get paid by the lecture, at least not by the minute. That would be ideal, and your lectures would be much longer. No. The reason I'm going to go through these again is just because practice makes perfect with these sorts of things, and I think seeing how these are done in a sort of step-by-step way is really good to refer back to when you're doing one of these examples on your own. So let's start with the aspiration and the unreleased rule. So, giving the following data, and we will assume that it is fully representative for English, are the sounds b and p separate phonemes or allophones of the same phoneme. If for whatever reason you weren't able to associate the sound that I was making with the correct phonetic transcription, use the three things that I've put up here. The regular P, the unreleased P, indicated by this sort of sideways L in its top right corner, and the aspirated P. So the words that we have are tipped, pitch, clapped, tipping, ship, clippers, captain, and spy. I'm not going to go through the whole rigmarole of listing all the contexts in the same way that I did last time, mostly because it's perhaps not a great use of time, and I find people are pretty good at that. So if you want, you can pause here and then take a look after and see if we agree. But I'm just going to list them in prose quickly here. One note that I would like to make is that in case you're unfamiliar with it, when there is an acute accent above a vowel, so the sort of accent that you see in French, the sort of diagonal line pointing upwards, that indicates that a vowel is stressed. Previously, there has been a sort of tick at the start of a syllable when it's stressed, and that is the correct IPA way of describing a stressed syllable. But for these phonological rules, it's generally the case that it's a bit harder to read when there are ticks at the beginning and stress is important because the stress is inherent to the vowel, not necessarily the onsets. So, for the purposes of this unit, we're going to show stress with an acute accent or a sort of rising line above the vowel as shown here. So, the aspirated P occurs at the start of a syllable before a stressed vowel. The unreleased P occurs before other stops. In fact, there's a bit more to this that we're not going to go too much into, but we'll stick with before other stops here. And regular P occurs elsewhere. So now that we have these prose descriptions, let's see how we can formulate this as a phonological rule. Well, let's start with the phoneme. And in this case, we're going to just say it's the regular P. So /P/. Again, we're using slashes because this is the phoneme. It is the mental organization of a set of sounds. Let's put the phones in. We've got P becomes aspirated P, unreleased P, and regular P. Now let's do the contexts. So to start, put the slashes after each of them to say where. Let's give ourselves some space, and then write the underscore to indicate the place where the phoneme becomes the phone. Now, there is one of these that we've already decided is elsewhere. So let's start with that. The regular P is elsewhere, and so instead of an underscore there, we can replace that so that it's just arrow, bracket, P, bracket, / elsewhere. Let's start with the aspirated one. We said that an aspirated P is at the start of a syllable. So in order to say syllable start, we're going to use the character $. And because the sound begins at the start of a syllable, we'll just put that $sign to the left of the underscore, like so. Now, for the following context of the aspirated P, we say that it comes before a stressed vowel. So we write after just V and then plus stress. Finally, to describe an unreleased stop that happens before another stop, we can simply write after the underscore C plus stop. We don't really care what comes before, so we can just leave this blank. So what we have now is the following answer. P, unreleased P, and aspirated P are allophones of the same phoneme. The rule for their distribution is the phoneme P becomes aspirated when at the start of a syllable before a stressed vowel. It becomes an unreleased P when before a stop. And it becomes a regular P elsewhere. This sort of problem solving is the sort of thing that you're going to be expected to do on the tests. It's a fairly important aspect of linguistics in general, as we will see a very similar process in the morphology unit. At its core, this is just a process of pattern recognition. So, always try to be as general as you can without losing any explanatory power. And by that, I mean without losing any accuracy to your statements. Let's take a look at one other data set, this time from Inuktitut. Are A and U separate phonemes or allophones of the same phoneme? The data set we have below is again understood to be representative of the language. We need no other data. So the data set that we have is iglumut, meaning to a house, ukyak, meaning late fall, aivik, meaning walrus, aniguvit, meaning if you leave, aglu, meaning seal's breathing hole, iglumit, meaning from a house, anigavit, meaning because you leave, pina, meaning that one up there, and note in this case the colon after the N is just denoting a long consonant, ani, meaning female's brother, iglu, meaning snow house, pana, meaning that place up there, aivuk, meaning she goes home, ini, meaning place or spot, and finally, ukyuk, meaning winter. Because we are only focusing on a and u, let's go through and take out any word that doesn't have either of these sounds. So, when we've done that, we've actually only managed to get rid of one word, but that's better than nothing. The next step to look at is, are there any minimal pairs between a and u? Remember that a minimal pair is any pair of words that differs by only one sound, where the meaning between the words is different. If there are minimal pairs, we know that these two sounds, the ones that differ, must be separate phonemes. Because minimal pairs show that sounds occur in identical contexts, we would say that the sounds in the minimal pair that differ are not in complementary distribution. So if we look at the data that we have, we can see words like ukyak, meaning late fall, and ukyuk, meaning winter. This is a case of a minimal pair. The only thing that differs between these two words is the final vowel, a for late fall and u for winter. How about the term anigavit, meaning because you leave, and aniguvit, meaning if you leave? The only thing that differs here is the third vowel, the one after g. In the if you leave instance, it's an u, and in the because you leave instance, it's an a. So here we have two minimal pairs. This is enough information for us to determine that they are separate phonemes. They do not occur in complementary distribution. Therefore, they are not allophones of the same phoneme. On an exam or a test, if you are asked to justify why something is a phoneme or why two sounds are allophones, you will have to talk about their distribution and any minimal pairs. If you say that something is a separate phoneme or that two sounds are a separate phoneme, you must show the minimal pairs that prove this. If you are indicating that something is an allophone, you must explain in the form of phonological rules, as we've seen previously, when each allophone actually is realized. Now that we've covered how to go through problem sets, how to formulate rules, and the difference between an allophone and a phoneme, we have essentially covered what we need to in Ling 101's phonology unit. To reiterate, phonology is the study of how the mind organizes sounds. It differs from phonetics because phonetics looks at the actual acoustic and physical properties of sounds. Now, as I said previously, A lot of this is something that comes with practice. So what I'm going to do is upload a couple of data sets where I'm going to ask you something like, are X and Y different phonemes or allophones of the same phoneme? These won't be these sort of writing videos. They're probably going to just be either PowerPoints or straight up handouts where one page is the data set and the question, and the next page is sort of a step-by-step procedure of how you go through and do it. The reason I'm not going through any more data sets in this video is because I'm finding that students are not necessarily benefiting from having this drilled into them in a single video, and they can always refer back to this to see how we have done it. So to save everybody some time and space, I've decided to sort of add these additional work sets. They won't be graded, but they'll be practice for you. Additionally, during the office hours this week, I will be giving some data sets and working with the group to show how this can be done. This will be something maybe more similar to an actual in-person meeting. I'll be using an iPad, I'll be drawing, you guys will be able to see it, and you'll be able to ask questions as I'm doing it. Chances are I'm gonna make this week's office hour a little bit longer. Not on purpose, I just imagine that I'm gonna end up going over time a bit. But if everyone gets it and everyone feels comfortable with it, then maybe I won't have to. So with that, I would say we've finished our phonetics unit. This is good. I find actually that students dislike phonetics the most. They don't necessarily find it the hardest, but they dislike phonetics the most. And they find phonology to be a little bit much all at once, particularly in these condensed courses. Coming up next, we're going to be going through my favorite topic, and the topic that I'm actually specializing in as a student, which is morphology. Now, the name probably tips you off a bit, but morphology is much like phonology, except instead of dealing with sound, we're going to be dealing with form meaning combinations. Now, as to what that actually means, check out the next set of videos on morphology for that unit, and hopefully, if all goes well, by the end of it, you'll know exactly what I mean. Again, if you have any questions, please email me or ask on the anonymous form. As well, in the anonymous form, if you know the answer to something or you feel confident in answering something, feel free to go ahead and do that. I will be correcting you if you're not right. That happened to me as an undergrad a couple of times. And it's anonymous, so you don't have to worry about sort of being embarrassed, but I find that it's actually kind of good practice for students to try and help each other answer questions, because explaining things to someone is probably the easiest way to internalize the answers in yourself and better understand it. So I'll see all of you guys in the next set of videos. Thanks.